Hello, my name is David Bradley, aka Schizophrenic, aka from the Mind of a Mystic, and in this video I'm going to argue that there is only one consciousness in superposition, or it is at least akin to that, and that all of reality is one concurrent hallucination. So, welcome to anyone that's new to the channel, or if you've watched any of my videos before on either channel, welcome back. This is a recurrent theme for me in terms of my understanding of reality and how I think about reality. I am diagnosed with schizophrenia, so let's preface the whole thing with that, and just allow me to sort of wax lyrical for you. So I've made a video about this before. It was called Life is But a Dream on my original channel, and then I've also made a video series called Reality is a Hallucination, and I've got a document here on the left talking about how I think tarot works, and it's generally just like a thesis on dreaming and synchronicity. So I'm going to dive into that and elaborate on it as I read through it. So where do we begin? So I'll just read out sections from the document and then I'll elaborate on them. An explanation of how tarot works from the perspective of belief. Tarot functions based on the idea that every experience is meaningful, and that, like a dream, this life has and is one concurrent message of both a grand, universal, and individual personal meaning. Just like when we wake up from a dream, we associate the events and characters of the dream with narratives and concurrent characters in waking life, often retroactively. When we go to sleep, we realise that this reality was just a dream. So this is kind of my philosophy of life in general. You could argue it's Jungian psychology. You could argue it is adapted from a bunch of different philosophies. You could include the Tibetan book, the Tibetan Yoga of Dream and Sleep, which, loosely speaking, encourages you to analyze the difference between the waking state and the dreaming state, and as a consequence of arguably because of schizophrenia, or arguably like the solution that I found schizophrenia, or the way I adapted to it, was to recognize that this dream, which is what you're in, is effectively a dream. That's the basic novel feature of this argument. This world is a dream state just like any other, and we accept it on face value because we possess the memories of ourselves within our brain. So just a little bit of a thought experiment to pad that out, which I often use to help try and explain this principle to people. If your essence was to arrive in my body, or if you were to dream that you were me, the requirements for that would be you would recognize yourself as me, so you'd identify with me, and probably the strongest mediating factor for that would be you would have memories of my life and be experiencing my life from my perspective. So you'd be fully immersed in this idea of David Bradley. You would think that you were me because you would have my memories, you would be in my environment, you'd be occupying my body, therefore you would be in fact me. And the only leap of faith really is to kind of recognize that, let's go slowly, but the idea is that we're all one consciousness, which is a spiritual principle obviously, but there's also the idea that, like, not only would you think you were me if you were to occupy my physical system, this organism, and be in my environment and have my memories, but that you would in fact be me. And then the leap of faith is kind of the idea that we're all one consciousness occupying simultaneously, or in reincarnation, or like multiform. Superposition is a really good word to describe it. It's basically like you watching this video is the same person that is reading or speaking to you now, and that like the unifying state is basically the dream state, the unifying consciousness. So like I paraphrase it loosely, where the sage sleeps, the say average person, the non-enlightened person, dreams, and vice versa. It's an inversion of the base assumption of which part of reality is the fundamental one. So I'm arguing that if you were to dream being me, you would be me, and that's actually what's happening all the time. And then when we go to sleep, we go into, say for example, the deep sleep state, we're just a state of pure thought, and we move out of that into these kind of apparitions of like other dimensions of reality, and with which we get amnesia between each state of dreaming. And when you drop back into this form as your current identity, you then translate everything that happened in the dream state into a way that's comprehensible by the current version of you, but that's always happening, basically. So like literally everyone in the universe, and probably the multiverse, and every other possible form of incarnation that exists in the entire multiverse is all just the same thing. Like, and this is, you know, the basic argument that I'm making. So I'll be right back. So, moving back to the document, in the dream we tend to fully recognise ourselves as the character we've been playing in that dream state, just as we do in the waking world, which is as much to say as that unless lucid dreaming is practiced, no matter how bizarre the last memory of our last dream is, there is always a link made when trying to decipher the memory of the dream into the waking state, linking our dream reality to the waking state. So it's almost like an interpolation or translation there. You know, the memories of David or me, in, you know, my memories are encoded into being in this body, you know, by the brain or the mind. And it's basically the same argument I was making before. This is back to the document, with just an additional subset of ideas, which is that actually there is only one mind occupying all bodies. And then I'm going to make the argument of like the DMT state is probably a pertinent thing to point out, like the rush of DMT during the birth process, the rush of DMT if you're lucky, the rush of DMT when you die, it's not anaerobic, but you basically, your lungs generate DMT during the dream state, as not along with melatonin and a bunch of other chemicals, but this is not new information. And so basically, what am I trying to say? For the sake of argument, for the process of this video, you want to assume that hypothetically the way we think about dreams as sort of abstract random representations of thought that we have in the waking state is also how us in the dream sees this world. So, and that rather than reincarnation happening, you do one life and then you finish it and then you start another, which is also potentially, you know, how that happens. There's lots of arguments about Bardo, and there's lots of arguments for transcendence through lifetimes from different states, and you might bring in the Buddhist concept of like the God realm. So you accrue a certain amount of karma, and that elevates you up and up and up and up and up and up, and so that when this form of life ends, you go to a next rank up, but then that karma burns off and you come back down, and it's basically the life, death, rebirth cycle of Buddhism and Hinduism, loosely speaking. And I'm arguing basically that that's happening simultaneously, rather than one thing happens, then the other in a linear fashion. It's yeah, I'm arguing that it's all happening simultaneously, and that the person, me telling you this, is the same person that's seeing that you're, is the same person as hearing this data in superposition. And it's an interesting concept. Loosely speaking, I remember talking to someone about the idea that there's maybe only one electron in the universe. Now, hypothetically, the entire universe is one electron, or like a giant. I don't put much sway in the holographic projection thing, but it's sort of like that. It's like one electron exists, but it's in and out of phase until observed, and then but it's actually potentially in superposition. It's the same electron. Now, that's a frame of reference to kind of imagine it, but I'm arguing that, yeah, that basically consciousness is in superposition, because if there's only one electron in superposition, if there's only one initial atom molecule, the singularity that supposedly gave birth to the entire universe, if that thing contained all of everything that could ever be, and then expanded out, and then it's all made of the same substrate, consciousness must have I also happen to believe that consciousness is fundamental, so prime consciousness is prime, and then the universe arises from consciousness, and I have reasonable sufficient evidence to believe that, but I'm just arguing that I think I made the point clearly enough, that I believe that rather than being individual consciousnesses happening cross-correlatory in this reality, that we're one consciousness. It's not a novel idea, so I think I've elaborated too much and I'm sort of waffling, so I'll be back in a second. So we shift forward in the document now a little bit. I'm asking a question now to the reader. So what if this life was but a series of dreams? The popular nursery rhyme, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. I'll let you fill in the rest of the song, so I'm not singing. What if we enter the dream state and we not only experience an entirely new scenario, but that this is the case for vivid dreams. Lucid dreams are the exception to this. I'm going to come back around to lucid waking, which is an argument I've already made in my reality as a hallucination series. But the idea that this reality is real is because we're presented with it. It's such depth, and it's almost, you could almost argue, the mundanity of reality is the proof that it's that the consistency of reality is evidence against it being real. Give me one sec. Right, so after that bit of a reconfiguration of my psyche, I'm back in the room. Having experienced extremely vivid lucid dreams where I've been able to meet other beings from other realities, which I've covered in other videos, I've had multiple separate, uniform, continued recurrent dream states. I've also had in this waking reality, as you would imagine, being schizophrenic and hallucinating and having hallucinations since I was 5 years old and I'm now 38. I've also had enough reason to believe that the lines between objective reality and subjective reality can be blurred. I've made an argument in my video about humbling yourself before God and prayer, and I've made innumerable arguments that justify why I think this. But the baseline understanding is that reality is not as objective as we take it to be. And if any of you have ever practiced magic, or with a K, or if you've ever looked into something as banal as The Secret or the Law of Attraction, or which is basically just prayer packaged for a new generation, just innumerable mystic traditions, basically, the thing they're drawing your attention to a lot of the time is that, well, let's take the Buddhist concept of Maya, or illusion, or Mara, in the sort of demon that tempted the Buddha as he's becoming enlightened. we've got samsara, right? So there's this concept that reality in Buddhism is samsara, and samsara and nirvana are the same place. They're the same universe, but one is in a complete state of equanimity and perfection and self-realization, self-actualization, and non-resistance, basically. Equanimity, or to be equanimous to all of reality. It's often accompanied by like a profound sense of relief or emotion or something like that, in like a sudden revealing of the perfection of everything that is, like sort of like you might get on a high-tiered dose of acid or mushrooms, or fucking any of the psychedelic you might care to take enough of to have this breakthrough moment. Like a lot of people, so I've not experimented very heavily with DMT back in the past when I used to take drugs, but it's like quite often the realization of oneness is correlated with like a lot of breakthrough psychedelic experiences. There's a lot of mystical experiences, a lot of religious experiences. So it's not novel territory. Where it might be slightly novel is, it just feels daft explaining to a camera like that nothing's real, like strawberry feels forever. But what is interesting is that this can be a lived reality, that you can get to the point where you're like, you can actually recognize. So like same as when you're in a dream and you're dreaming, and you might train yourself through lucid dreaming techniques to be like, is this a dream? Is this a dream? Is this a dream? And the more you do that in the waking state, the more you start to recognize in the dream state, oh wait, I can fly, this is a dream. So and then when you experiment more and explore deeper into the lucid dreaming state, you start to realize that for all intents and purposes, you're not limited by time and space. You're limited only by your imagination and the speed of your thought, and then your thought starts to compound to the point where basically this idea that you're not God becomes, at least when you're dreaming and in a lucid dream state, the idea that you can't do anything is when you're visiting hyper-real realities where you have incredible powers of manifestation, move at the speed of thought, generate an entire universe around you. The longer you're there, the more you acclimatise to what it's like to be an agod, the more you start to recognise that that's probably like a hyper-real, self-evident reality. And then, as I was trying to say in the previous clip where I stopped because it freaked me out, the banality and repetition and consistency of this reality is actually an argument against its objective existence, because like that's what freaked me out before when I said it. The consistency of this reality. So reality is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. This is like a ground space, or like it's one of the most limited forms of consciousness you possess, and whether you remember it or not, you are in fact, or at least have the potential to be, an all-powerful, infinite creator God with infinite cosmic powers, and to quote Disney, the genie, but this is your itty-bitty living space. This is the consistent illusion. And then, so through having basically gone through what I would say is the closest proximity I've ever had to enlightenment or awakening, or a profound sense of revelation about reality that was unfathomably strange, which ties in with the law of mentalism, but we'll come back to that in a bit if I remember, or it seems pertinent. I realised it was possible to lucid dream whilst awake, and then once you're in that state, which will tie into the law of mentalism, because that's from the Hermetic law, the Hermetic tradition, the 7 Hermetic laws. Once you realise that this reality is not fully as objective as you might, and I will argue this as well, it's not as objective as you might think, you start to be able to experiment with what the bounds of reality are, and start to see through some of the limitations of your own thinking, that then allows you to orchestrate change and cause effect in the universe. So let's come back with, once I've had a little reconfigure of my brain, the law of mentalism and recognition of stuff. Yeah, hold on. Loosely speaking, I'm arguing that enlightenment, or what people deem enlightenment, or what the Buddha experienced, or what, like, I don't know, Christ might have experienced, or any of these sages or saints or sadhus and so on and so forth, might experience, is the illusory nature of this reality. Samsara and nirvana are the same place. It shifts. You suddenly realize that the dream state is the ultimate reality, where you're a trans-temporal pan-dimensional being, and this reality is only as objectively real as we assume it to be. And then like psychic phenomena start to appear, manifestational phenomena start to appear, synchronicity starts to appear. It's just the most profound thing about my experience that I think of as my enlightenment is the recognition that this reality is an illusion, and that the immediate consequence of that is you start to, as you do in the lucid dream state, where you start to, what can I influence, what can I control, what outcome can I make happen, you start to recognize reality as a substrate in which your mind exists, not your mind existing in the substrate of reality. And that can be quite profound in itself, that actual realization. And then you realize you start to have the ability to manifest outcomes, like you start to experiment on reality just as a natural course of going through that process of awakening. You start to think, okay, so obviously I can't physically change matter in this reality, so that's a factor. But as someone who's experienced like non-physical beings for 20 years that seem to be able to influence reality or react to what's going on, or like in my video about thought broadcasting on my schizophrenic channel, trying to figure out like how much of reality is fixed, finite, and out of my control, in a sort of stoic fashion of like, can I influence that? No, I can't. I can't suddenly make this camera turn into jelly. That's not how this dream state works. But I can influence the outcome of events through thinking about them. That's profound. That's what the law of attraction is describing. You can manifest, in the way people will put it in modern terms. You can pray things into being. Action at a distance is a big one. I just heard a bang. I'll be back in a second. So, after that minor distraction, where was I? To come back more to the point of the law of mentalism from the 7 Hermetic laws, and consciousness being prime. I'm just going to make a little argument here, just to help hopefully move the needle forward on this perception or this way of thinking, and then I'll try and come back to what I was talking about before, because I got distracted by the random noise. Simple thought experiment, which is, Descartesian, like I think therefore I am. Basically, where is your consciousness right now? Like where is you? If you were to point at it, like most people go the head or like heart or gut or just the whole body. It's a bodily image. But then, let's just say, for example, your consciousness exists in your finite body. Now, let's not talk about non-local consciousness or non-duality for now, but the thoughts are in my mind. Where is everything else that's happening in your experience? And I've argued this in the Reality is a Hallucination video. Everything you've ever perceived, everything you've ever known, everything that's ever happened to you, all that you are and all that you'll be and all your life will ever be, like the Floydian, if you want to call it that, Pink Floyd from Dark Side of the Moon. Everything that's ever happened to you has happened in your mind. Basically, that's the law of mentalism in a nutshell. Consciousness is prime. The only evidence you have that anything exists is because you exist now in this body, and therefore you could hopefully make the leap of perception, which is you're generating reality around you potentially, so not in a solipsistic fashion, but just that everything you've ever known happens through your senses. Therefore, the illusory nature of reality is taking place in your own mind, and the universe is mind. Basically, that's the argument. Everything is taking place within your own mind. I think that it's a superposition thing rather than I'm just talking to the universe myself in my own head and I'm the only one that exists. But there's arguments either way for how to relate to that. But ultimately, everything that's happening is happening within your consciousness, and you could say, well, I know for a fact that I can walk down the road and then there'll be the shop and I can get the bus and all these other things. But that's also happening in your mind. Like, your memories are generating reality. Like, your vision is probably about that much of your visual field, and then the rest is filled in by micro movements of the eye and a hallucinated projection of the rough estimation of what's happening in the environment at all times. It's an illusion. Now, you could go the solipsistic route and say, therefore I'm the only one in the universe, which you're the only one in the universe that you can say for certain exists, but in this particular state of consciousness, we can obviously perceive that other beings exist in a way that is different from a dream, like the early stages of a lucid dream, where, for example, in a lucid dream you start to recognize that you're generating all the other people. You know, some people make some really grim arguments about how everyone's just an NPC and you're the only player character. I just don't agree with that. However, I do think that any certainty about anything that you know in the known universe or unknown universe that is generated in your mind is a product of your mind. Consciousness is the primary source of your experience. Your senses are the primary source of everything you've ever known. And like, we exist in a kind of temporal flux which evaporates when you go into an awakened or enlightened state of mind, as far as I can tell. It becomes timeless, infinite oneness. You reach a state of absolute rescindence of self, which is like a major factor in this conscious awakening, or this integrated way of thinking. And you start to remember that you were never born, you never die, all those kind of stereotypical psychedelic and religious revelations. And I'm just kind of trying to make it clear that I think basically that's completely true, and it's self-evident if you study it for long enough that how do you know that the colour red is the colour red? Because you're looking at red, and other people say the word red when they look at it, but we don't know that anyone else is seeing the same colour. In fact, when we experiment even within the bounds of this reality, we realise that everyone's perception is different, because we're not occupying the same electromagnetic structure of consciousness individually and at the same time. The only way for us to know honestly, genuinely, what someone else is seeing would be to occupy their vessel, and thus far we haven't been able to do that with any material form. So I just wanted to clarify that. I'm going to get some thoughts together and I'll be back. Another really interesting argument surrounding this is if you were God and you were able to dream into being any possible experience you would ever have. It's Alan Watts' speech that had a wonderful impact on my thinking. If you were to be able to dream any possible variable of reality that you could ever imagine, and just generate various infinite variables, eventually what would happen is you would dream that you were the exact person that you are right now. And the only extra step I'm making is that, it may not even be an extra step, the only extra step I'm making is that, like, the I here is all of this. And I might as well be screaming in the dark right now trying to explain this, because I am the irony of talking to a camera saying that I'm the only one in the universe exists not lost on me. But I also recognize that in this state of consciousness, other beings that I experience seem to be as complicated, complex, unique, non-NPC. There seem to be enough sufficient evidence of player characters in that metaphor that I think it's closer to a superposition sort of state. I feel like the one way it's mind-boggling is like, you go into the dream state and you remember dreams, but only this version of me remembers only a limited. So like, if you induce a hypnagogic state, or when you're falling asleep and you consciously try and remember your dreams in between the waking and dream state, you tend to have more dreams, and you tend to recall more of them on the verge of waking up from sleep or at the verge of going down into sleep. And what I've been trying to do as a kind of spiritual endeavor is to link as many consciousnesses that I experience into one as possible. And it seems like in this reality, I've been succeeding at that more than in others. I don't know for certain, but I feel like I'm trying to weave a thread between a pan-dimensional being, because of the nature of what's happened to me in this reality. I have like slightly better dream recall. I remember hallucinations. I seem to be able to act as a dream weaver or a dream traveler, like a Nairanaut, and that allows me some really crazy lucid dreams that I've had before, which has been cool. But it's also a bit like expanding out from one node point in this conscious universe into multiple consciousnesses. So it's also like, rather than like a multiple personality in this world, which, with different state dependent memories, you could argue maybe that's a factor as well. It's like having multiple personalities but in different universes, and like recurrent dreams could be argued to be something closer to being multiple people, and that the dreaming version of me happens to remember this conscious state and vice versa, allowing a bridge between consciousnesses in multiple distinct universes. And that's thinking that that's happening has led to me having more self-actualization in the dream state as well, and having phenomenal lucid dreams. And all I'm trying to suggest for this argument of this video is that to experiment with the notion at first whether your reality that you're in now is real at all, and rather than being like, oh no, nothing's real, and getting freaked out by it, actually look at it and actually like assess, like, do I have sufficient evidence, or is this a solipsistic kind of limited consciousness individualistic state, or is there more to it than that? And then that leads you to the study of religions, when you start having experiences that you might have non-local consciousness, as we're talking about before, or like telepathic impressions or hallucinations, or the shadow people, like seeing people from other dimensions. Like, for 20 odd 30 years now, I've been able to see energy hallucinations all around me of like a substrate of materia that exists. It's almost like seeing the air or being underwater, and I've never really been able to make a coherent argument out of that wasn't this. Basically, this seems to be the most coherent headspace I've ever been in, regarding, like, what am I trying to say? The only thing that's the most coherent argument that makes sense of absolutely everything that's ever happened to me, and the seemingly trans-temporal movement and impossible abilities or induction of different states and so on and so forth that I've ever experienced. And whilst this is also evidence that I am schizophrenic, it also is the unifying theory that doesn't require me to carve up reality and compartmentalize stuff to be able to make a image. I don't have to chop anything up. I don't have to block anything out. I don't have to think about anything. I don't have to selectively remember. When I fully remember, fully embrace, fully embodied as myself, this explanation of reality makes things more whole rather than more discongruent. So I'm sort of arguing that like it's the only way of thinking that's ever made sense of everything that's ever happened to me all at the same time. And that's about all I've got to say for today. So that's the end of part 1 for this argument. I'm going to come back maybe later on, but yeah, we're all having a dream. We're individual people, but the irony is that everyone else that exists in the universe is the same being having that same dream, but from a different perspective, which is a religious principle, but also that like reality is inside out, and that the objective world is the multidimensional hyper-galactic, hyper-real reality, and that this is like samsara. And then when you awaken from that, you realise that even samsara contains the seed of nirvana, and that like once you awaken in this world, you can start awakening in other worlds, and you can start to become a true Annihilator, where you can travel to multiple realities. You can become a pan-dimensional being. And I would argue most of my experiences that have been labelled as shamanism or schizophrenia or like hallucinations or so on and so forth, basically just the intersecting of multiple consciousnesses that are all part of one multi-dimensional structure that is me as multiple identities across multiple realities, across multiple states of consciousness, and that you and I are the same thing, basically. So that's it. Mic drop. Boom. Look out for the next episode. Thanks for watching. Peace.